Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Cup of Joy, the podcast. I'm so excited for this new season because the guests that I have are really tuned into bringing joy to the forefront of your life and working through the truth testimonies that they have navigated on their own. So today's guest is no exception. She's been on the show several times, and we're just going to take it in a whole nother unearthing growth arena today. So welcome to the podcast, Kari.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me again.
I know it's so good to have you back, but I thought of you right off the top of my head when I thought about adjusting Cup of Joy, the podcast, to really speak a little bit more pointedly at divorced women. And I know that you have been through divorce yourself, but you've also gone through so many shifts, so many changes. And April, which is going to be when people are listening to this one, April on the show is really all about telling your truth and transformation.
Yeah.
And I think that you're just one of those humans who can't help but share your truth now that you've gone and navigated transformation and continue to evolve and transform and all of those things now that you're in a different space of your life. And so I just think that's such a beautiful thing. And today I wanted to kind of talk about what I'm calling the should cycle.
Mhm.
And so this conversation is relevant to all human beings. This is not specific, as are all the topics on this podcast. They're not specific to divorced, just exclusive rather to divorced women, because at the end of the day, it all boils down to the same emotional hoo-ha and whatnot. But I know that as a divorced woman myself, and you being a divorced woman, I think we both experienced the shoulds of marriage, the shoulds of divorce, the shoulds of getting over and going through grief and moving through healing and all those things. And what it looks like on the outside of hearing people trying to tell you what you should do, what you should be, how you shoulding all over you, right? Until you kind of decide for yourself, like, I know what I need. I know what's right for me and all that kind of stuff. So, that's the direction we're going to kind of go today. But first, maybe share a little bit about your backstory pre-divorce, what life kind of looked like,
Mhm.
and we'll just trail into the kind of more current situation as it evolves.
Yes. So good. And I just want to thank you for seeing me in and seeing me as somebody who speaks my truth. That is such a compliment for me because that was not something that was a quality of mine for most of my life. And it was really a difficult thing to navigate and to strengthen that muscle. And it took so much courage, and really kind of it applies to what you're asking. And so just to give you a little bit of background, I actually got married at 19, and I got married because it was one of those shoulds. I was pregnant, and I actually grew up in the Mormon religion. And so it's very frowned upon, at least at the time that when I was in the religion, to first of all to have abortion. It was not an option, and then also to be married or raise a child out of wedlock. So it's either give the baby up or get married was pretty much what my choices were, and giving the baby up, it wasn't an option. So I got married. And now looking back, everything's divine. So the whole experience in getting married was perfect. There were so many experiences that I learned from, but really we shouldn't have gotten married. We were so young. We didn't know who we were or what type of relationship we were, if we were even compatible. So got married at 19 and really wanted to prove that I was a good Mormon wife, and popped out 3 more babies, and just thinking at some point I'm going, like, I'm going to find my happiness, because this is
Mm,
what I've always been told in the religion, is that as a woman, you get married and you have babies and you live happily ever after. And so I was doing that and was not happy. My happiness actually was dwindling. It just became non-existent the more years and the more, babies that I added to the family. And it was really discouraging. But then I had those constant shoulds from the religion. And really, it's like, I really did ultimately have a choice. Nothing put a gun to my head and told me I have to stay in this marriage. And but I really allowed others' beliefs of what was right and true for my life to like navigate my life and be my life. And so stayed married for 14 years and got to a point where I was a mess. And I'm pretty sure on your podcast, I've talked about eating disorders that I had, and was at the end of the marriage was thick in really extreme eating disorders, bulimia, exercise addiction, as well as overeating disorder. So I was just a mess. And it was all because I wasn't being authentic with my truth and what I desired in my life for me. And it was taking its toll on all parts of my life, my mental, my physical, my spiritual. And it was really, really scary to choose different. So I'm going to pause at that point. And where do you kind of want me to go with that?
Yeah, I love that you use the word choose different, because one of the phrases I often use in my coaching is choose again. And it sounds so simple. It sounds so simple to literally just kind of snap your fingers or nod your head and go, choose again, choose differently. Another phrase I use is like, do life differently. And I also reached the point where I was so unsatisfied with how I was living my day-to-day life, which sounds like what you're describing, just like just so unsatisfied, but nobody around me knew that, because I did a really good job making it appear as though I was all right.
Everything's great.
Everything's good. Got my stuff together, because this is how women should be when they're living life. Like, this is how we should present ourselves. This is how we should do things. This is what's next on the life list, right? And so, but when you get to that point internally, for me, it just felt really, really tight, constricted, toxic in my body, where it was like, how can I continue to live my life like this, out of this authentic space, and present myself in this way? Like, I could no longer continue to think about what other people thought I should do. I had to do life differently. So what did you do to really respond to your own soul's request to do life differently? Like, how did you answer the call?
Through just really painful, for all people involved, choices. I didn't do it in a healthy way at all, because I didn't know how to honor my truth and how to speak my truth. I actually ended up cheating on my husband, like fully sabotaging the relationship. And that was my way of like getting out, because I knew when I made that choice, I knew in that moment, I am ending my marriage. This will end my marriage. And at that, I didn't know how to do it any other way, even though, I mean, you're like, what? I mean, just tell your husband. I couldn't. I just didn't have that ability to speak my truth. That's why when you shared that, it was like, I received that. Thank you so much. There's been so much work in me being able to get to that point where I can speak my truth, no matter how painful it's going to be, or how it's going to hurt somebody by me speaking that. But inevitably, it hurts more not to. I cause a lot of hurt within myself, within the person that I had the relationship with, and of course, my husband and my family, by making that choice to not speak my truth, that I wanted out and I didn't want to be in the relationship. So when I see people choose to speak their truth, despite like how scary it is and what that's going to create and what's going to happen going forward from that, I am like, I applaud you. Good job. I have
Mm.
friends who have come to their marriage and I'm done. And they chose it in a healthy way and they chose to navigate that. I'm like, so yeah, I didn't speak what I needed,
Mm.
and it eventually came out what I was doing and the actions that I was taking, and it was really ugly. We went to counseling and I still couldn't speak my truth. I still couldn't say, I want out. I don't want this. Like I basically drug him along and with these like hopes of us being able to make it work. And I was done. I was out energetically, emotionally, physically, I was out. And it came to a point where he ended up coming to me and just saying, it's time for a divorce because you're just not trying. Like I
Yeah,
can feel you don't want this.
I think the shoulds come into play there as well, where it's like I I put my hands over my face because it just like makes me feel super, it just makes me feel very activated. I was gonna say gross inside, but it's kind of
Mhm.
one and the same, right?
Yeah.
When I hear people say things to other people, because I have received these same types of comments throughout my journey, especially in the very beginning of being newly divorced,
Mhm.
of, did you try hard enough though?
Yeah.
But did you try hard enough? But did you guys go to counseling? But did you guys go to church? But did you guys do all the shoulds? It's like,
Yeah.
but you should
Yeah.
have, if you wanted it, you should have. And it was like, looking back now, I realized that I didn't want it
Mhm.
anymore. And I didn't go through all the shoulds, but I got a lot of feedback because I didn't do what I was supposed to do to keep that marriage for as long as humanly possible.
Mhm.
And I just don't know that it's necessary for people to try to keep that like iron grip, that like tight grasp around a
Mhm.
relationship that's meant to breathe. And that can mean
Yeah.
a lot of different things for other people.
Mhm.
So I just think it's really brave to take ownership over the fact very publicly. That's even more difficult to do, right? It's
Mhm.
difficult to speak your truth just in your tight, close circle. Like
Yeah.
that's a tough step. But it's even bigger to speak your truth to the masses, to know that you're providing inspiration, motivation, normalizing pain in a way
Mhm.
that a lot of people don't realize is possible. Like, guess what? People cheat on their significant others.
Mhm.
It happens. People do things that they're not proud of, and it happens. And we get to forgive ourselves. We get to forgive others. We get to move through life. There gets to be so much room for healing, but it all starts with speaking your truth
Mhm.
and recognizing that the shoulds, they're just insignificant. Like, you should only do what feels right for you, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Your take
Always.
on that?
Always. And what's right for you can shift and change. So I love there are so many things that you shared that I just could touch on. So one is that, you know, when how do I want to navigate this? First of all, I want to touch on cheating and kind of my process. This is a little bit off track, but I feel like it's important. And that is my process of, first of all, being able to name it and speak it out was very, very difficult because there's so much shame and there's so much judgment out there to when people make those choices. Now, here's the thing: is that it is not just a one-sided thing. There is a co-creation of that manifestation in a relationship, and so it's important to realize that when people make that choice, whether you're the one that's being cheated on or you're the one that's cheating, that is a cry for help in the relationship, and it's the last straw.
Mhm.
And so it's important for both sides to take ownership to like where is my part in this, And maybe it's that you picked somebody who's just really toxic, and that's kind of a pattern that you do. And what can I heal so I stop attracting in people that are doing these things? Or where did I fall short in this relationship where my lover has chosen to go outside of this sacred contract with us and chose to seek connection and love somewhere else? You know, there's so many things to it that it's so important for us to look at it from those lenses and from those places and take radical responsibility where you play in this role. So
Oh,
that's one
that's,
piece.
whew, that's
Yeah,
so important. If I can
so
just touch
important.
on that for a second, because
Yeah.
the other part of it too is, for me at least, it was realizing like there comes a point in your relationship with anyone where you kind of have to look at it and go, if something's off, what's off within me? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I not delivering to my own self and my own soul that I am not communicating to my partner that I need, or I have, and they're not on the same page? But regardless, I'm requesting them to take care of whatever this need is within inside myself. And so I love that you said it's this collective. It
Mm-hmm.
is so a collective experience.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it comes to the aspect of cheating. And I love that
Yeah.
you said, like, it really is for so many people this cry for help, or this just
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't what I want anymore. It's
Yeah.
not so much like you are a horrible person, not you
Mm-hmm.
specifically, but the person who's being cheated on, even like
Right.
they're not a horrible person necessarily, maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time not. They're just going through their own stuff. But it's like, I haven't recognized what I needed to fulfill within myself, and what I needed to fulfill as a team
Mm-hmm.
to move forward. So yeah.
Yeah. And what I realized for my relationship personally was that there was a lack of communication and connection. And it was from
Yes.
the very beginning. So I went 14 years of just not feeling connected and not feeling seen and heard and loved and communicated to. And it was a two-way street. You know, there was my parts that I was falling short on, and there was a lot of parts where he was falling short on. And it was just kind of inevitable with just where I was and what I needed, that I would go outside of our contract and seek that, because I just wasn't getting it for 14 years. And it's like, you can only go so long. Um, so there's that piece, the with cheating. And then the other piece to it is that it's so important that you give yourself grace, and that you get to a place of forgiving yourself, because we're here to make mistakes. We're here to experience all of it. And some of those things are really blissful and amazing and expansive, and then other things are really painful. And it's and when you go out of integrity of like what you're, like who you are and how you want to show up, it's really painful, but it's this opportunity of really going deep within and going like, is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to show up? And so then you get solid in who you want to be and how you want to show up. So there's this gift in it, if you choose to really truly look at it and see and have grace and compassion for yourself, for your choices. But you're never going to get to that side if you're beating yourself up. And I did. Oh, that was a hard one to navigate through, and really truly forgive myself for making that choice. Now, I don't have any regret as far as like um choosing to divorce, but I definitely had a ton of regret around the way that I went about ending the marriage. And so I had to go through this whole process of really truly forgiving myself, but I had to see that I didn't know how to speak what my needs were, and to like receive those from my partner that I was in the relationship with. And so I sought it outside of me. So there's that piece that I just felt really important that we touched on. And then going back to relationships and just that should, like I should have done all these things to try to make this relationship work. And it's so individualized. There are some relationships where you really could like kind of spark the relationship again by having somebody support you as far as a therapist, or you know, going to a couples retreat or something where you're just kind of ignite that fire again. And then there's other relationships where you just know, you know, in your heart it's complete. This contract that we've had together, this soul contract, is done. And what's so funny and silly is that we like end relationships all the time, as far as like friendships go, or business relationships. There's all these different dynamics of relationships that we're in that we allow to flow in and out. But when it comes to our love relationship, it says something about us if we just suffer through and we just stay. It's something about this like loyalty and commitment and dedication. And that says something about us when we stay, when we're miserable. And I believe that it is no different in our love relationships, that some of those also come to a completion. And whether it's a relationship where you've actually made a marriage contract, or it's just, you know, somebody that you're living with. But I don't believe that we should stay in something just because we you know, set our marriage vows and now we need to stay, despite the fact that every part of our soul is saying it's time to be done. And we don't need to put ourselves through this whole rigorous process of years of counseling and all this stuff, when we've known from the very beginning, when we had that first intuitive hit, that this is done. And we've got to like stop that with relationships. You know,
Ah,
really truly allow relationships to flow in and out, all of them. And
mhm.
that's okay. It doesn't say anything about like us and our commitment and loyalty. It just means that that relationship's complete.
And to really strengthen your intuition to know what those hits are. I think this conversation around like the shoulds versus just trusting yourself
Mhm.
to speak your truth whenever that is, and understanding that sometimes, a lot of times actually, speaking your truth isn't going to feel very good,
Mhm. It's
but
scary.
that's okay. Like we have to train ourselves to be uncomfortable,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Because if we don't train ourselves to be uncomfortable, then when situations come up, we're where we can speak our truth, but then we suppress ourselves to not speak it because we're afraid of what other people are going to think, what other people are going to feel, or what we're going to feel. If
Mhm.
we're going to feel pain, or if we're going to feel contracted, or if we're going to feel any other emotion other than just like peace, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times we distract and deter ourselves from going in that direction, when indeed our intuition is saying, no, speak that truth,
Mhm.
what the
Mm.
situation needs right now more than ever. And I love what you shared earlier on, which was, in the moment, it felt like it would just be easier to, I don't think those were your words, but I'll paraphrase. I think that it would just have been easier to go about it in one way, when in hindsight it would have been quote unquote easier for you to just speak your truth
Mhm.
over and on with it, versus
Mhm.
all the other things that bubbled up as a result of not.
Mhm.
Um, do you
Yeah.
have, what kind of advice would you give people who are trying to navigate that conversation with their loved ones, particularly as it relates to family? Because we've never really talked about this part
Mhm.
of it, but especially from your religious background, right? And your family being a part of that, and all the things like your extended family, I mean, like all of
Yeah.
that stuff going on. I guess this is a two-parter. How do you go about communicating? Maybe not how did you, but how in yourself now, in your true self
Yeah.
now, what would you have told her to go about communicating with the family? And then the second part is just, when you receive feedback that's not your truth,
Mhm.
then what's the communication? You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
Two-parter there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It comes back to really truly building up that muscle of being able to speak your truth. So for the first question, and it's super scary at first, um, but you know, honestly, it's like So I'm gonna share a process that I went through of being able to get to that point where, and I know you were talking about with family, but I'm gonna kind of broaden it to just people in general, especially in like relationship dynamics, of being able to speak my truth. And what I noticed was, okay, so first I didn't really, I mean, I knew that my choices of not speaking my truth in my relationship created a lot of pain, unnecessary pain, but I didn't know enough to understand like how much like unnecessary pain I created, until I started really looking at my patterns of not speaking my truth, and then what it created, like the ripple effect of that. And my my thinking was, I don't want to speak this because it's going to hurt their feelings, or they're going to be mad. And so I'm gonna, that people pleaser in me was like, I'm just not going to say anything, and I'm going to just stifle down my truth and what my intuition is telling me to do or not do. And I'm gonna sacrifice that and just allow it to just keep going and not say anything, and maybe it'll just like go away, and it doesn't. And then more pain ends up happening. And so I was noticing that while I was single and dating people, and just like my intuition was telling me I don't want to be with him anymore, but it was so hard to say that because I don't want to hurt his feelings. And what I realized is that it caused more damage and more pain, because now I'm not speaking my truth, and they can feel that there's an energetic feel. And so then it's off, and then you're in it, you're like, now you're months into it, or like even years into it or whatever. And then you're like, I want out. And they're like, what? I don't, this is so painful. But if you would have shared it in the very beginning, that it would have been, yes, they might have been upset or whatever, but it would have been less painful for them if you wouldn't have been living in a lie of what your truth was or what you wanted. And so it really took like me kind of bridging that gap of my intuitive hit of this is what I need to do, or this is what I need to speak, and then actually speaking it. Like it took some time, and I had to give myself grace that this is hard for me. This is not something that comes easily for me. That does, for some people it does. And it's just so easy for them. Nope, that's a no. And I'm like, man, that's amazing. I wish that was something that came naturally for me. And it didn't. So I had to practice it, and I had to take those courageous steps of, I remember one time needing to tell somebody that I didn't want to be in a relationship with them. And I was just like crippled with just so much fear of speaking this, because I had a feeling that he wouldn't take it very well. And I remember just thinking I couldn't get on the phone. I needed to like just text it, or maybe I sent like a voice note. And I think I probably texted out because I just couldn't like actually speak it. And I remember sitting there just like in cold sweats of like, just send, just send, just send. And I remember sending it and just going, okay, it's done, it's out there. And he didn't respond well at all. But I was so proud of myself that I spoke my truth. And so the more that you do that, it'll spread into all parts of your life, whether it's in a love relationship, or it's to a friend, or it's to a family member, that you're going to allow yourself to have the uncomfortable conversations and to speak your truth. And then you're teaching people
Yes.
that you are somebody who honors your boundaries and honors your truth. And then you're creating these really healthy relationship dynamics in all parts of your life. And now the relationship that I'm in, if there's anything that's uncomfortable, my boyfriend knows. I call it out right away. I don't let it sit and stew. And he's so tuned into me that he's like, I already knew you were going to bring it up. Or he'll call it out,
Yeah.
like, I know that you want to talk about this thing, but I'll just say, hey, there's something I want to name. There's something that like was said or done that I want to talk about how it made me feel. And this is what I'm like processing through. I'm taking that radical responsibility of like, this is mine, and we're in a co-creative relationship. So this is ours. And we're going to talk about this and just get it out there and clear the air so that our relationship is clean.
Yeah.
And because if you don't, but you got to practice that. It's got to be something that is not just like when really big things happen in your relationship where it's like, whoa, this is a doozy. Because if it hasn't been practiced on little things, it's going to be really hard to speak your truth and speak your needs when something really big happens, because it hasn't been practiced in the relationship.
That's it. I mean, and it can be little things too, right? Because I think a lot of times people think that building that trust within yourself or that self-expression or that truth telling, it only happens like in big moments. It can literally be happening in small moments where you're sitting at the dinner table
Yeah.
at your big family Thanksgiving, and you no longer like cranberries or your grandma's recipe, right? And everybody looks at you like you're crazy because you don't
Mhm.
take grandma's secret recipe, and they're like, but you always love those things. Yeah, you know what? I don't really have the
Not
taste for it
anymore.
anymore. And it
Yeah.
goes the same thing in relationship too, right?
Yeah.
Like I just don't have the taste for that anymore, especially when we're in long-term
Mhm.
relationships,
Mhm.
be it friendships or romantic relationships or whatever kind of relationship. The longer the relationship goes, the more we get to be adaptable and speak our truth
Mhm.
lovingly, because if we don't, then we're putting on this facade that we're something that we're not. And
Mhm.
that's one of the greatest gifts, I think. There's so many gifts now that I'm on kind of the other side of the pain. There's so many gifts that I realize have been given to me as a result of moving through divorce. And one of those things is that now that I've started in a fresh relationship, it's not so fresh anymore. It's been like 5, 6 years, I think 5 years this year, which is still
Mm.
kind of fresh.
Yeah.
The moment I met this wonderful human being, I realized it is my priority to be totally
Mhm.
transparent for myself all of the time, because if you just try to go down the traditional route of going on the date, being a type of person that they're going to want to be with, that's where we fall into these traps, because you were never being the person that you love, that
Mhm.
you trust, that your authenticity is shining through. And then they wonder why you all of a sudden morph into this person over the months or years that you're together. Whereas if you can go from the beginning, truth telling and
Mhm.
not shooting all over the place,
Yeah.
there's this beautiful thing that gets to unfold where, like you said, your partner becomes very intuitive with you
Mhm.
and either asks or knows to expect that whatever pops up, you're going to say something about it.
Mhm.
Or maybe you're going to sit with it and say, something feels off. I can't name it right now. Or I don't want to name it just yet, because sometimes we need space. But
Mhm.
I want you to know there's something there, and there's something I know that will be coming back to. And maybe in
Mhm.
if when I say that with my partner, he's just like,
Yeah.
same thing that you said. He's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
figured there was
Yeah.
something that we needed to talk about.
It's so good. And it, it brings up a recent experience that my boyfriend and I were navigating through that was so awesome. So, we do family night every Tuesday night, and we all come together and we eat a meal. And my boyfriend he's got these new things that are going on in his life that he's really, really excited about. Well, he had his phone at the table, and he just was like, messaging some people back and forth and engaging in the conversation and going back to his phone. Well, that's a huge pet peeve of mine. First of all, no phone at the table. I don't even let my children have the phone at the table. And then the other one is that my love language is quality time. So when somebody is disconnected by coming in and out of either a TV or a phone or just something where they're not fully engaged and present, it's very triggering for me. So I ended up sharing with him after the night. I asked him, a little bit later on, like, hey, you should put your phone away and just be with us. And then afterwards, because it wasn't like fully discussed, I called him up and I'm like, hey, I'd like to name something and talk about it. And he already knew what it was, because we're that in tuned. But sometimes like a partner doesn't know. They have no idea. They just don't know. And so they don't know until they know. That's why it's so important to communicate it. And there has been times that he's like, I had no idea. And I just shared, I shared how I felt. And I shared that, how it made me feel to have him have his phone there, and that what my desire was. And my desire is to have full connection, full presence. And we had this great discussion, and he was able to receive that. And he came back to me and said, thank you so much for just speaking that. I want to show up 100% in this relationship and make sure that you feel loved and you feel connected to. And so by calling me out on these things just shows your commitment and your love to this relationship. And that's just amazing to be able to have it be received, and not just like, oh my gosh, like it's not a big deal. I have my, like, that doesn't feel good. So it like really, really speaking to your partner that like, I'm not trying to point my finger at you. All I'm trying to do is name something that can be a wedge in our relationship and can cause more. Because if I didn't say anything, he doesn't know, and he's going to continue to keep his phone there at the table. And it's going to be something that eventually I get so upset about. And then it creates there's more disconnection. And then it becomes something that didn't need to become something if you would have just named it in the beginning.
Yeah. I think that what you said earlier around just having so much compassion for yourself, compassion for others who are willing to also speak their truth, instead of jumping to conclusions. Because at the end of the day, when we're moving through some tough times, compassion will give you courage.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And also bring you to this space of safety. So I think for me, what I learned about myself is if ever I'm going through something tough, like you mentioned, really owning it and forgiving yourself, those are key elements right there. Owning it and forgiving yourself, forgiving others, whatever you need to do, but also feeling safe enough to do that. And you can speak your truth when you practice safety. And there's a million ways that you can cultivate safety. You and I both teach practices on this. Yeah. So if people need support doing that, they can reach out to us. But learning how to bring safety back to your body is going to be, for me, one of the number one tools of speaking your truth, because it's going to feel really uncomfortable and really scary sometimes, but you can be scared and also hold yourself in a safe space all at once.
100%. And that is why I feel I can continually go to my partner and share with him how I feel, how an experience made me feel, because I feel safe expressing that, because I know he's going to receive it and he's going to implement the actions that I'm desiring, or we're going to come to a middle ground. Because it's not always, I'm like, oh, it's not always, hey, this is how I feel. And he's just like, okay, let me change it. There may be something where it's like, well, this is the way that I feel. So where can we find our middle ground? Safety is essential. And I say that to him all the time. I feel so safe expressing my truth to you. So if you're in a relationship where you don't feel safe and it's not received, well, that's something to look at. And that's something to really seriously consider. Okay, what can shift? And will anything shift? Because maybe they're not willing and they're not in a place to want to do any type of meeting you in the middle or hearing your experience. And to me, I'm like, that's a red flag, because if they truly love you, they want to make sure that your needs are met and you feel seen and heard and loved. So it's either, bring in other, which is like, a counselor or somebody that you feel safe being able to navigate this thing in your relationship, or, have really, really difficult, open, vulnerable conversations around what can we do to shift this. And maybe it's that you have like weekly meetings where you kind of check in and just ask like, okay, how are we feeling? What could I do better? What could I do less of? Or leaving the relationship. And really going through this process of healing the parts that are attracting in somebody who doesn't see you and hear you and honor your needs, and then find somebody that does.
It's really interesting because this can be used like on so many levels. And the word that keeps coming up from the universe to me right now is like family. And if we kind of go back to talking about like communicating to your family about your decision to divorce, or
Yeah.
your decision to maybe break up with somebody, or your decision to not be in a relationship, your decision to maybe not go to church anymore, right?
Mhm.
That's a big one for a
Mhm.
lot of people. I know for me, it kind of was.
Yeah.
Your decision to not work this job anymore, your whatever those decisions are. There's another phrase that I think is really powerful, and that is, if you don't feel safe in certain conversations with folks, family, friends, outside of your romantic relationship, even if you don't feel safe actually talking about the topic, another phrase that I like to use is, I like to get the courage. I like to
Yeah.
get the courage to just say, there's certain things that I don't feel safe talking to you about. It
Mhm.
makes my body feel really activated, nervous, jittery. Use your words, right? Like,
Mhm.
every time these things come up in conversation, it just feels so unsafe. And so I'm
Mhm.
wondering if this is a topic that maybe is not ours to move forward. And there's
Mhm.
relationships that you have to do that with, and relationships that are a little bit trickier, stickier. Um, but also I heard a coach say this one time, and I thought it was pretty cool. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because we've never talked
Mhm.
about this. It's not
Yeah.
something that we learned, but I heard it, and they described rating your relationship on a regular basis.
Mm.
And I think this is important to do with yourself. I do this on a monthly basis as part of my monthly reflection audit, is like, where am I at with myself on a scale of 1 to
Mm.
10? Where am I at with myself today, this week, this month? Like, what does this look like? What does this feel like? And then, like, what would make it a 10? I think that's just an
Mhm.
easy way to gauge. And if you do this, they were suggesting you do it every night when you go to bed, if you've got a partner that you're going to bed
Mm.
with,
Yeah.
right? Or you're on the phone checking in with this person, if it's a
Mhm.
regular, frequent partner of yours, right? And just saying, like, hey, like, how are we in
Mm.
relationship today? Because a lot
Yeah.
of times we just don't know. Maybe this person's at a 2 in
Yeah.
our shared energy, and you're at a 10, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And then how can
Yeah.
we get closer? How can we inch closer to each other? Maybe it's compromise, maybe it's just shifting of some sort, but checking in, doing those checks and balances, I think can be a really cool experiment in any relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So good. And that, once again, it just comes down to communication. Communication is everything. That's what I'm realizing. Communication safety. So if we don't have those things in the relationship, then it's going to inevitably fail. Fail is in just like end. And we have like such like a negative feeling towards fail. It's like,
Mm,
we fail all the time in so many
yeah.
things, and that's great. We learn so much from those. But it's either going to end, or it's going to be just a relationship that you're just so unsatisfied with. And like, that's not what we're here to experience. Subpar relationships and unhappy lives. We're meant to thrive. We're meant to be in bliss and joy, and to be able to experience this life with people that we love and we feel connected to.
Mm,
So, stop being in relationships and in situations that are just draining your life force energy, and not having you feel so alive and so connected.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just getting another download, and the words were "what if." And I think a lot of
Yeah.
times people will say to themselves when they're in relationship, well, like, we'll convince ourselves to stay in a situation or a relationship because, like, well, if it doesn't work out, then, like, it's
Yeah.
it's not even what if, it's how. Like, if it doesn't work out, like, how am I going to find somebody else?
Yeah.
How am I going to move on? How am I? And we get so lost in this, like, how game, instead of like, what if, instead of thinking how, what if we ask ourselves the question, like, well, what if this allows me to have so much space in my life to figure out what I do want?
Hmm.
What if? And then, just like, I call it A plus assumptions.
Hmm.
What if your
Hmm.
way into creating the version of yourself and the life that you truly desire, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was, my marriage was at the end, and I was thinking about, okay, what if I get divorced? What is, is that the best scenario? And of course it's like, then your mind goes into like, oh, what if it's the worst choice of my life? What if I,
especially with kids, you have
yeah,
kids. So you're like,
uh-huh,
you're going like mama brain plus trying to do all the brains.
yeah. And just thinking, what if this was the best that I could get? And I'm going to walk away from that.
Mm.
And because he wasn't abusive, he's a really good person. And we could even do a podcast on like our relationship dynamic now, which is really healthy and thriving. And it's like, I believe that all relationships could come to that if we choose. Like, it's got to be obviously, both people wanting to have a healthy relationship post marriage. But it's doable. And it's like, honestly, I feel like if you've got kids, like, yeah, we got to be that example. But yeah, just going through this rabbit hole of what if it's the worst choice I've ever made in my life. And really it came down to, okay, I'm miserable. So I would rather be alone and like have to navigate all those things than stay in this. And that's like, that was the big one for me, is that it was leaving was the lesser of like, it created more lightness in my system than staying. And I knew that I was taking a risk and that I didn't know what was going to happen. One of the things that my ex would say was like, who's going to want you? You have eating disorders. You're a mess. And he was saying that out of fear of like, because he didn't know what was going to happen. And he just kind of wanted to keep what was there, even though it wasn't very good. And who's going to want you? You're old. And of course, like I believe that I was 31 or 32 when we got divorced.
Me too.
So it's like,
Me
I
too.
still wasn't
Yeah.
that old, but like,
But you
yeah,
think you are. You
yeah.
think
And I'm
because
thinking, oh my
again, you
gosh.
should be 20 and married, and you should have the dog and the kids
Yes.
by then, and you should be saving for their college fund, and you should be, they're just all shoulding, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what our minds
Uh-huh.
have been trained to do.
And just thinking, what if I can't be successful? At that time, I had a side job of personal training, but it was not making enough. I was not making a full income that I could support myself. And so just what if financially it's the worst mistake that I can make? And so I was taking some big risks in taking that leap, and going back to having discussions with family. When I told my family that we were getting divorced, when we came together and shared with my family, they came back with, well, do you like hate each other? And we're, both of us know, we're friends, but we're just don't, the love's not there. And my family's argument was like, well, why would, like, if you don't hate each other, why would you get divorced?
Yeah.
And so it was this almost kind of like this belief that you need to settle. Like, if it's not horrible, then just deal with it. Just stay, just for the sake of staying. And once again, it comes back to that. No, you should be so alive and so in love. And it should be that way till the day you die, in all parts of your life. And so if it's not that, then it's what needs to change or what needs to be let go of.
Yeah.
And we are evolving beings. We are never meant to be stagnant and just complacent. We are meant to evolve and change. Mother Earth is such a beautiful example. She's constantly growing and releasing and transmuting and just recycling and growing and tearing down. She's such a beautiful example, and we are no different. So can we have that ability to be so flexible with our life and not be so stuck on this is it? And when it becomes not it, to be okay to let that go and let something else come in. And that doesn't mean like constantly throw things away when things get difficult. Sometimes it means that we lean in to the challenge and to this opportunity of growth. And that means like staying here and letting yourself kind of navigate this thing. But you only know if it means like, stay here, like lean into this uncomfortableness, or it's time to let this go.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of that so much. I love also that you used the word alive,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of times people get confused because they're like, well, you deserve you deserve to move on so you can be happy. And I don't
Mhm.
know that it's necessarily always happy, but it's
Right. It's not
always
always.
alive.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
always alive. You should
Mhm.
feel the aliveness in your soul, especially when you're in relationship and when you feel like that soul is dying as a result of
Mhm.
not honoring the relationship with yourself
Yes.
and others.
Yeah.
It's time to step up and speak your truth. It's
Mhm.
time to stop thinking about what everyone else says you should be doing and just get really real and honest with yourself.
Yes. There was a who I don't know who shared this. I think it was a book that I was reading and it was talking about relationships and that we will stay loyal in a relationship with other and we will be disloyal with ourselves because it's not in alignment with what we desire or what we're wanting or who we're becoming, but we're staying loyal to it because that's what society has told us we need to do and so what we should do. But what is like the ultimate disloyalty is disloyalty to yourself. And so by you being disloyal to yourself, you are actually being disloyal to the relationship, because if
Yes.
it's not in alignment for you, that person that you're with is not getting the fullness of you. And so you are actually robbing them of a really alive and fulfilling relationship
Yes.
by staying in it when it's a no
Mm,
for you anymore.
that is so good. And I also just thought of when you said, anyways, I thought of society always tells us that we should be honest, right? The
Hmm.
golden rule. Well, the golden rule is treat others as you want to be treated. That's nice. But
Yes.
also like you shouldn't lie. So you should
Hmm.
be honest. So if there's any
Hmm.
should that we should follow, that's the one that I'll allow.
Yeah. Be truthful. Be
Be
truthful.
honest. Be honest with yourself. I think a big, huge part of this, and you mentioned it earlier, was building that trust muscle.
Hmm.
You can't trust yourself if you continue to live a lie. The
No.
more that you suppress those truths, the more depleted, that I call it the trust bank, that the trust bank in the body is going to get. Every time
Hmm.
that you're not loyal to your truth, to yourself, you don't keep those promises to yourself, we lose trust. So the best way to build up that trust bank
Hmm.
is to be honest with yourself. And maybe the first step is just that. Maybe it is self-dialoguing the truth. If you can't say it to the other person just yet, maybe it is feeling safe enough to actually communicate it to yourself out loud, not in
Hmm.
your brain, but say it out loud in your car on the way home from work. Go to the
Yeah.
park and sit on a blanket and look up at the clouds and say that truth to yourself until you feel safe enough to communicate it
Hmm.
outward.
Hmm.
And I think that
Yeah.
that's a really beautiful way to honor yourself. I did a lot of self dialogue when I was going through divorce. Um, and a lot of tearful truths. I always say, like, tears are truth. There's something in there. There's either a painful truth in there, a happy truth in there, but tears are always kind of this representation of me, this reminder that there's truth in there. It's
Yeah.
okay to lean into the truth no matter what end of the spectrum it is.
Hmm. Yeah. And you know what ends up happening when we're dishonest with others and we're not speaking our truth, that it builds up and builds up and builds up. And then there becomes this resentment towards the other person, because your needs aren't getting met, but you're not speaking them. So really, ultimately, there's resentment towards yourself. There's this frustration and anger towards yourself that you haven't been speaking them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, so many amazing nuggets as usual. I just want to thank you for coming on and speaking your truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy for anyone to come on here, and the way that you're just so vulnerable and no longer living with that shame and regret. It's such a powerful process of the healing journey when we can just be open and honest with ourselves and share with others. So thank you for doing that here
Yeah.
today.
Of course.
I'm actually curious if you have, it's just a different way to end the podcast today, but if do you have a favorite quote that you can share with us?
Yes. I do.
Good. Yes, I love
It's like,
quotes.
I mean, yeah, I know there's multiple quotes that I absolutely love, but I feel like this one is just great and just kind of ties um, in what we've been talking about. And that is that, uh, if the journey is not the destination, then you're doing it wrong.
Oof.
If the journey is not the destination, then you're doing it wrong. So we're always so focused on like, when I get here, then I'll be happy, abundant, safe, whatever. It's like, can you, no matter where you are, whether you're in like the thick of just a really hard relationship, or you've just laughed a relationship and you're in the thick of the unknowns and the loneliness or whatever, or wherever you are, or you're just desiring a relationship and it's been a while, can you allow yourself to just enjoy the journey and the place that you are right now, and
Mm.
not be focused on like when? Like that's the key to being fully alive and to really truly be in this place of contentment. Because like happiness, it's fleeting, like all of that, but we can be content with our life if we can just fully be here and just allow yourself to experience exactly what you're experiencing right now, because you won't experience it ever again, well, at least not in like who you are and where you are. You may come back around to certain feelings and certain experiences, but it's different. And so can you just enjoy where you are now?
So
Because that's all that
beautiful.
exists.
So beautiful. I truly believe that joy is the journey. Like joy is the journey. It is.
Mhm.
We're always on it. It's not these ebbs and flows. So that was a perfect way to wrap things up. If people want to find you these days, I know you're kind of a little bit more mystical these days, not doing
Yeah.
social really. How
Yeah.
can people be connected to you? And we'll put them in the show
Yeah.
notes too, but how can they be more connected to your energy?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't do social media, but I do have a podcast and you have
Yes.
been on it. So you can find that on Spotify. It's Ignite, Awaken, Expand podcast with me. And there's just really great topics that we jam on there. So they can find me on Spotify or my website, which is starlightcoaching.com. And yeah, those are the places that you can connect with me. You can email me there, or you can listen to all the things that I love to talk about on my podcast.
Amazing. Yes, we'll put everything in the show notes. If you guys want to hear more from Kari or I on any topics, make sure
Yeah.
you drop them in the comments below or reach out to either one of us. We would love to have deeper conversations on here with you in
Yeah.
mind. So thank you so much for being here. I adore you. I love you so freaking much.
I love
And
you
I'm just
too.
so much gratitude.
Yeah. I love you too, Mama. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, take care. Go out into the world, shine your light bright, and love yourself healthy. See you soon.